Hey guys, Uncorrupt here. Murder at Castle Nathria is out, and you're probably wondering what the best archetype is for every class. I'm going to be answering that question just based on my personal experience and what I've seen, and I'm just using hsreplay.net here for a little bit of reference just to be able to talk about the classes. Not enough data to really be able to draw any conclusions, and also there's a lot of just bad data from bad decks that are going to be affecting some of these win rates for the classes. I don't think this is an accurate representation of where we're going to end up within the next week or two. One note here, I'm not going to have any specific deck lists. I'm just going to be talking about the archetype as a whole. The reason why is because I don't think there's any deck that's been fully refined. Decks are still going to be changing, and I just always feel a burden about sharing decks with people and then people, going out and maybe potentially crafting bad cards and hurting themselves if they have limited dust, as I know a lot of people do. That's just a cause that's close to my heart because I've been on the receiving end of that, where I got some bad advice, not necessarily in Hearthstone, but potentially in another game, and wasted my in-game resources and then, just kind of ruined my play experience. So, moving on to the decks. Warlock. Unquestionable, the best Warlock deck is Imp Warlock. Again, the list is still seeing some shuffling around, but Imps is just extremely strong. Nice little aggro deck, board-based aggro. And it beats the weird stuff. It beats people who are experimenting with bad decks. And it's just overall really strong. I'm sure you've probably seen it on the ladder. It never runs out of gas. There's always going to be imps to be able to draw cards with the impending catastrophe, so on and so forth. So very strong deck. I would definitely recommend playing some type of Imp Warlock. And I think the deck is probably not all that expensive. If you don't have Rafam, you can actually just not run Rafam. He's good. He's like a board in the box when he's infused, but you don't have to have him, and you can put together a perfectly fine deck without him. Hunter, best deck in my opinion is going to be an aggro Wild Seed Hunter. Again, this is a deck that's seen a lot of changes. My most recent video was actually an updated list of this, and again, I know people are out there pushing the collateral damage version, and I have to say I disagree with running 2 copies of an 8 mana card in an aggro deck. You end up with one of those things in your hand in the early game, and you would rather it just be any other card in your deck. It just clogs up your hand. You're like -1 card all game. And I've played this a few times. I've never actually been able to get off of collateral damage. So it could just be a matchup thing if I'm not seeing the matchups that other people see where the collateral damage ends up being good. But in the long term, I'm not sure that card is going to make the cut. Certainly, I'm not going to be playing it anytime in the near future. Shaman, the best archetype is actually the one that nobody's playing. It's Control Murloc Shaman. There's lists out there that are actually running Sire Denathrius for an additional win condition for the deck. And then it just has the ability to be able to remove the win condition from your opponent. I see lots of Mage, I see lots of Druid. You could potentially Mutinous to eat something like a Sire Denathrius, a Mordresh, or a Kel'Thuzad. Ends up just being really strong. And the Shaman having its own Denathrius, you can infuse it quite a bit just because, you've got the Piranhas from Schooling, you've got the Stags that are being summoned by Wildpaw Cavern, so on and so forth. So, Control Murloc Shaman, in my opinion, probably one of the better decks in the meta right now. It's just being severely underplayed. I don't really see anybody at all playing that deck. It's probably going to catch on a little bit, though, as time goes by. Mage, again, unquestioningly, the best deck is some form of Volatile Skeleton Mage. The deck just ends up being pretty strong. I think you have the option to play it like a control deck, and potentially, depending on your hand, you may even be able to play it as a tempo deck. It's a pretty strong deck. Maybe not as straightforward to play as some people might want to make it out to be, and I think that could be what's affecting the win rate here, but Volatile Skeleton Mage, it's going to be the best deck in the best archetype in the class for now. Druid, unquestioningly, again, for me, it's the OTK Sire Denathrius Druid. There's a couple of different builds with some different cards that are going to be in it. The best version appears to be a 40-card version, but I've seen everything from Shrubagazer to actually people running like Oracle of Elune and Naga Giants. It's just a really strong deck. It can be vulnerable to early pressure depending on your hand and how you're playing if you're not aggressively removing minions from board. But overall, it just seems to be a really strong deck, and it has inevitability. If the game goes on too long, the Druid's just going to win with some like ridiculous Sire Denathrius combo. Priest, likely the best deck for Priest is actually going to be Naga Priest. It's going to be the same play style as Naga Priest from the last format. You're just going to be playing things like Pelagos and the location, in addition to, the typical Serpent Wig shenanigans that we saw before. It's just all about being able to stick those minions, buff them up, and then kill your opponent from there. So similar play style, just I think a bit more powerful deck based on some of the newer inclusions that we can put in the deck. Paladin, a bit of a joke right now. I think the best deck for the class is actually going to end up being Holy Paladin. It's just a slow, grindy control deck. In my opinion, it's not very fun to play. There's not like some super compelling decisions, and you know, just long games don't really particularly appeal to me. But if you need a control deck, I think Holy Paladin is going to be the way to go. Paladin may have gotten, you know, a little bit of extra juice. I think you can run like the 40 card version now, start off with some extra health. It does make it a little bit harder to find Cariel, but it allows you to run like the Dude package and some of the other things. Holy Paladin, probably the way to go there. Rogue, I feel like it's being weighed down just by some really bad decks. People are playing kind of like the combo Necrolord Draka deck. They're trying to OTK, they're trying to make a 25 or 30 damage weapon off of Draka. They're playing Loan Sharks, they're playing Snowfall Graveyard, lots and lots of coins, and then they get a big minion off of the location. And I really don't think that's the way to go. That deck, again, just folds to early pressure. You're on a clock. You have to be able to kill your opponent by a certain turn or you just die. I think the better version of Rogue is going to be some version of Boat Rogue, and I think there is room to be able to play like a Necrolord Draka package that's going to be running the locations as well. But you just don't necessarily need lots of coins to be able to make that happen. And instead of going for like these 15, 20, 25 health minions, and same thing for the Draka weapon, you can actually just go for a more modest 3, 4, 5 health and attack minion, and, you know, a 2, 3, 4, 5 attack weapon, and be perfectly fine. I think Boat Rogue is probably where it's going to be at for Rogue in the long term in this expansion, but we'll see as things continue to develop. Warrior near non-existent. The only warrior I've seen out there is actually Enraged Warrior, and it kind of functions more of like a hand buff deck. So typically you want to have like a Remornia in hand and or a Crazed Wretch in hand. Crazed Wretch, the new 1 mana 2/4 that has charge. If you can buff those up with things like conditioning, with the other 2 mana 1/4, I think it's maybe Anima Extractor. It's a minion that actually buffs minions in your hand based on minions on your board taking damage. That's probably going to be the best way to be able to take Warrior. Again, I don't think it's going to be consistent, and you can see Warrior really struggling here. Not sure that there's going to be any Warrior deck in this meta that's going to be able to compete at a decent level. Hope I'm wrong. I really like Tempo Warrior when it's a thing. Control is definitely dead. Warrior just really struggling and maybe actually just needing new cards, even though new cards were just released. Demon Hunter, again, likely being weighed down just by bad Relic decks. Relics, when I reviewed the cards, I said they were slow, but they would snowball hard. I still believe that. The problem is, what's the shell that we're going to put the Relic package into? That's a question that's still up in the air. Possibly the best thing that we've seen so far is some form of Death Rattle Demon Hunter, just because the Razor Boars potentially bringing other minions out of your hand still allow you to compete for the board and maybe buy you time to be able to play your locations. But unfortunately, the locations in Demon Hunter are actually slow and may actually need some kind of a buff. Assuming Blizzard is going to do some type of buffs at some point and not just nerfs, I feel like relics for Demon Hunter could be an option there. There should still be a good Demon Hunter deck, though. Fell Demon Hunter should be good. I think you can work in some of the new cards with, like, Crixus, the Magnifying Glaive, the weapon that's going to allow us to draw cards. Bibliomite, certainly very, very strong, the 2 mana 4/4. And then the 0 mana +3 attack, I believe it's Dispose of Evidence. Cards like that should be good. I've got a nice little theory crafted list that I plan on testing soon. I'll probably have a video out on that in the near future. But I think you have to be careful with card draw. If you don't hit, like, the weapon, for example, and you play the Bibliomite and you're shuffling cards back into your deck, and you don't have card draw to be able to replace those, you could potentially just run out of gas. So I think I have a list that might address that a little bit, and we should certainly be able to do better than a sub 40% win rate deck with the Demon Hunter. I'm Uncorrupt. That's my opinion on the meta and what the best decks are to be playing in the early days of Murder at Castle Nathria. I'm going to be back again next week, and we're going to do a proper full-on meta review once we have more data and access to more things. So again, I'm Uncorrupt. Thank you for watching. Good luck out on the ladder.